6. So moving on to our third week of our diary entry today. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I know Salt to the Sea may be a bit complicated not being at school, but you all seem to be really keeping up with it well. So this week, we will be focusing on figurative language, colons, adverbials of time and place, and possessive apostrophes, all of which we've covered so far this year. So quick do now, I would like you to try to fix the spellings on the screen. Now, I've got 4 spellings per line, only 1 is correct, and these are based upon common spelling mistakes which you've seen in your work submitted, because it's all war-based, these are all war-based words. So this might be a nice opportunity now to pause the video for 30 seconds and just try and decide which is the correct spelling from each line. So hopefully I had a nice opportunity to pause it then. I have circled in red on the screen the correct spelling, so it's trenches, soldier, armies, season, baron and troops. Right, I'm going to take note of these correct spellings just to make sure that you don't make these common errors in your work today. So by the end of this week, you'll be writing a diary entry of Joanna treating Florian's arm and removing shrapnel. Now, what is this word shrapnel? You can see here on the screen a picture of shrapnel, and you can see there are fragments or remains of bombs during the war, which is obviously what we're learning about. And these were extremely dangerous because these could have become embedded inside people's skin during the war, which could cause infection. And this is what's happened to Florian in Salt to the Sea, which is why he's got that wound in the side and he often complains of the pain. So you're going to be writing this diary entry based upon Florian having this removed, which you have read about already in guided reading. But if you cannot remind yourself, don't worry, because I've screenshot the page on the board. So I'm going to read that page for you now. While you're listening to it, I want you to be thinking, how would he be feeling and what might he be thinking while this is happening? Shrapnel. About 2 days ago, you stopped the bleeding by applying pressure, but that pushed the fragments deeper, causing more pain. It's infected. You poured liquid on it at some point. Vodka. Her voice resumed in my ear. There are a couple of pieces I want to take them out. I don't have any anaesthetic. Do you have anything to drink? I asked. Yes, but I'll need the alcohol to clean the wound before I dress it. I felt her hand on my shoulder. I should do this now, before the infection becomes too advanced. Small boots appeared in front of my face. The Polish girl knelt in front of me with snow wrapped in a handkerchief. She swept my hair aside and pressed the cold compress to my forehead. Go away, I told her. Wait. The nurse looked at the Polish girl. Can you please go outside and find a large stick? The girl nodded and left. The nurse then sat down in front of me. I watched her mouth as she whispered. Her name is Emilia. She's from southern Poland. Her father went away for safety, near Nemersdorf. So hopefully that gave you a bit of background information. You should have already read that anyway, into how the nurse went about removing the shrapnel in Florian's side. You can see at that point in time, this point of history, they wouldn't have had anaesthetic, which numbs pain in the same way that you would do in hospitals today. You can see that vodka was used, Viscid used to numb the pain. You can see he'd already tried to stop the bleeding in his arm, in his side beforehand, but this resultantly pushed the shrapnel deeper, causing a lot of pain and caused it to be infected. And he caused vodka on it to try and get rid of the infection, but it did not work. Also, you'll notice the nurse sent Emilia to go get a stick, and this was so he could bite down on it to control his pain. So you might want to remind yourself of this when you're writing the diary entry this week. So in answer to these questions, how would he be feeling? He would be feeling 100% in pain and also suspicious. The reason I wrote that he'd be feeling suspicious is because he doesn't really trust people very easily. We know about this about his character, especially regarding his pack. We know he holds really tightly to the pack on the side of him. We don't know what's in it at this point, but he might be suspicious of what people are doing there. And what might he be thinking? He might be thinking, I want this pain to be over, but also I don't want anyone to look inside my pack. So he has these conflicting thoughts as well going on inside his head. So the focus today is figurative language. Now we're using figurative language because we really want to build the description in the reader's mind of what it's like inside the barn, which is where the shrapnel removal is taking place. So just to recap on the board here now, reading it out, it says, figurative language is when words and ideas are used to create mental images and give impressions. When we use figurative language in our poetry or our writing, it gives our ideas strengths and helps the readers to understand what we mean. So again, we use it because it provides a stronger image in the reader's head as to what is going on. Now, what are the two different types or many of figurative language? The first one are similes. Now, similes are used when we say one thing is like another, and we've worked on this a lot this year in both literacy and guided reading. So, for example here, The snow was on the ground like a thick, warm blanket, and this might be something you might magpie in your writing today, because we know it's winter time when Salt to the Sea was set. And what's important about similes is that they must contain words like or as, and that's what distinguishes them from metaphors. But they also help to build up the image in the reader's mind. So the snow was on the ground like a thick, warm blanket really helps to build in the reader's minds that the snow was thick, it covered the ground, and how thick and white and cold it really was by saying that. Metaphors, however, say that something is something else. So, for example, here, you've got Tony is a tower of strength and Wayne Rooney is a goal machine. Personification is the final thing which you might want to use today, is when we write about an object as if it is human. For example, the tulip smiled as the sun rose. You might want to pause this video now and think of, can you think of any similes or metaphors or personification which might describe wintertime? And you might want to think in your head, it's not only going to be wintertime, there's going to be a really, really cold barn. And I'm going to let you pause this now before I go ahead and reveal some of the similes, metaphors and personification which might be used to describe a really cold barn which Florian and Joanna were both in. So hopefully I have an opportunity to pause the video then. Some figurative language which I came up with to describe a cold barn were things like cold as an icy hand on your back, the snow was as white as milk, the shadows are stains on the snow enveloped the ground, that's a nice personification, the snow was a blanket, that's obviously a nice metaphor, and the fog was a thick cloud, that is a metaphor as well because it's got was or is. However, the first two examples, cold as an icy hand on your back and the snow was as white as milk, are similes. This might be a really good opportunity for you now to write down some of these similes, metaphors and personification to use in your diary entry today. So you might want to pause this video now because it will really help you. So what are we going to be writing about today? Because remember, it's our first paragraph, again from Florian's perspective in a diary entry. So it's going to be first person, past tense, describing feelings. But this time we are writing about a cold barn. And it's the barn which Florian was in when he had his injured side and Joanna treated him to remove the shrapnel. And it's a cold barn with lots of other refugees in, some of which are injured, and they're probably really cold, really ill. You know, we've learned all this background information about refugees now, so we know that there'll be lots of other refugees cramped into this small, cold room. What we're going to be doing is writing a setting description in this first paragraph, describing what Florian can see, hear, and smell in this cold barn. So you might want to pause this video now, and using both the similes and metaphors, which you might have written down before, I want you to try and jot some ideas now. What might Florian see, hear and smell in this cold barn with so many of the refugees before he's about to be treated by this nurse he doesn't quite trust? So hopefully you had an opportunity to pause that video here. Obviously in a lesson now, I would write up a model write, getting your ideas, a shared write, answering these questions on the board. And writing, remember, a paragraph, but it's got to be a page long, guys, because some of the things I was seeing in Seesaw is that some of you were only writing a small paragraph. It's the same expectations as lessons, so it should be a page long. So these are some ideas of what we might have written together in a shared, right? You can see it's color coded in exactly the same way as previous week. So what can Florian see? And remember, we've got to use figurative language, so similes, metaphors and personification. See how many you can count in my paragraph. So I looked at my surroundings in the derelict barn. I could see people gathered around a small fire for warmth, although they still looked as cold as a winter's day. So that's what he saw. He saw many refugees gathered around a fire, and I've already included a simile, as cold as a winter's day. What else might you see though? Okay, so you might see children moaning in the corner, you might see children crying, you might see someone has collapsed out of fatigue, you might see people fighting over remains of food. You might see snow falling outside the barn. You might see rain slashing into the barn. All of these will create an atmosphere of what you might see. What can you hear? Okay, so I wrote, I could hear the nurse, brackets, who was very attractive, brackets, asking other people in the barn if they needed any help. The sound of children whining could also be heard, which sounded like a wounded puppy. So I've got another nice simile in here. Sounded like a wounded puppy. You might want to magpie that in your own, or just do something similar, obviously not exactly the same. Hearing, I like that though. So maybe you could hear the wind banging against the door. You might hear fights breaking out in the corner. Again, you might hear your children crying. I liked the nurse. Maybe you might hear the shoe poet talking people about shoes. You might hear Eva grumbling in the corner. You might hear Amelia kind of moaning gently to herself, talking to herself. You might want to pause this now and think, what can you hear in this cold barn with lots of other refugees? And can I use figurative language? And finally, this final sentence here, how does he feel? I've said here, I felt freezing, so I stuffed straw into my coat. It was prickly, but not as painful as my wounded side. So obviously he's going to be in pain. However, how does he feel? You might say instead, I felt restless. I couldn't trust anyone in this barn. They might guess my secret. Or I felt frozen to my core. I felt shattered, but I wouldn't let my sleep overtake me because I had bigger concerns like my side. Or I felt nervous around Joanna because he obviously found her attractive. Any of these sorts of things, how does he feel? And can you turn this into a simile or metaphor as well? You might want to notice in this model right here, I've included brackets for emphasis because we really push ourselves to include those year 6 vocabulary. I've also got a dash and also ellipses. However, the focus is figurative language. So the only things which I'll be able to mark are figurative language, but make sure you're focusing on what Florian can see, hear and feel in this cold barn. So hopefully this has really helped you with your first paragraph now on this diary entry for week 3. I'll also put on Seesaw a help sheet which will contain some figurative language and the steps to success. I cannot wait to see your work on Seesaw. Good luck.